Thank you so much. So, enough emotion. Let's start with some data, a bit of data about me. This is a picture from when I first started to think about our relationship with data as human beings, and particularly around human data, data actually about human beings themselves. Now, there's some data in there. There's kind of a nice unique identifier that helps you find me from the internet. And if you look really closely, you'll spot a historic detail in here. This photo was taken in the era before selfie sticks, when you had to take pictures with your bare hands and post them to the internet. A lot's changed since then. We now have selfie sticks, obviously. But more seriously, the amount of data has changed dramatically. One estimate says that there were 4.4 trillion gigabytes of data on the planet last year. And by 2020, there will be 44 trillion gigabytes of data. That's a lot of zeros in that number. It's actually a lot of ones and zeros, if you think about it. So if you imagine this room, and imagine this room being 10 times the size and 10 years' time, you might know one or two more people, but you would know a much smaller fraction of the universe. And we actually have access to less and less data, even though there is more and more data. But where is all this data coming from, and what are we doing with it? Well, some of it is like my wonderful selfie there, and the videos and all sorts of great things that we post to the internet. But it comes from other places. How many people here have a fitness tracking device? Okay, so we're capturing data about ourselves, our heart rate, our location. And also things are starting to produce data. We have thermostats which capture the data in our houses minute by minute and regulate the temperature. And then, of course, the machines themselves are talking about us behind their backs. We've got machine-to-machine communication where machines are exchanging data and creating new data all on their own using algorithms and heuristics. So there's this kind of explosion in data, and yet it's not a literacy that we're taught. Right? We're not taught how to understand data and how it impacts with us. And actually, most of it's very, very subtle points of influence in our lives. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. See, data is part of a bigger puzzle. Data, hopefully, if we kind of structure it and work on it a bit, becomes information. And with a bit more magic, we can get some insight, some context, and hopefully it becomes knowledge. And then some magical journey takes it to wisdom that lets us live a better life. Now, what's wisdom? Well, that's a little bit of a philosophical question. As one musician and journalist, Miles Kinton, said, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing that a tomato doesn't belong in a fruit salad. So there you go, it's a bit of data for you. I showed this to my teenage daughter, and she said, that's not the philosophical question, Dad. The philosophical question is this: is tomato ketchup a fruit smoothie? Teenagers. I said, well, where did you discover that amazing fact? She said, Tumblr, the internet. The internet really has changed our relationship with information and data. Now, the data doesn't actually live on the internet. It lives on servers, usually inside of databases, and we have great technology for dealing with and processing data. But what have we done with that data historically as human beings? How have we managed data? Well, before computers, we had books. We could go to libraries and discover bits of data, bits of information. But actually, the printing press is a relatively new invention in our history, so what did we do before that? Well, some people will say we had cave paintings. Now, if you think about it, they're not the greatest information retrieval device. And there is very little that is socially more awkward than being in the middle of the savannah on a big hunt and somebody saying, I need a fact about the mammoth, and having to sprint back 18 miles to a cave. It's just awkward. It turns out that as human beings, we developed a really, really good technology for encoding, managing, storing, transmitting, preserving, and distributing data. And it's a technology that we're not quite so good at using these days, but we have used it a lot today. That technology? Stories. All right? It turns out that stories are a really amazing piece of tech for data processing, because they do some things that I have to use very difficult algorithms to do normally. Stories take our world, which is very spatial, is very associative, all these complicated, loose associations between things. It's very visual in its nature. And what they do is they pack that into a linear, sequential, auditory form. Right? Stories have the form of this, then this, then this, then this. They've structured the data in a wonderful way, and it seems particularly suited to the way that our memories work. We remember stories much better than we remember any other form of data. We need context around it. But stories do another little bit of magic with data. They do it the other way around. Because if I give you a linear, sequential, auditory story, if it's a good one, it's going to conjure up images in your mind, associations with other memories, yeah? So stories are this powerful way, actually, of connecting with data, with information. So why is it then, when your boss calls into the office to understand why a particular project's gone wrong, the boss doesn't say, hey, tell me the story of what happened here, right? That's not what we do. Our culture is that we default to the Benjamins. It's all about the Benjamins, not this Benjamin or that one. The Benjamin Franklins, the dollar bills, the pounds, the numbers. We default to numeric data. We love the stuff. We have a passion for numeric data, which is kind of curious. So why is that? Why do we like the ones and zeros? Well, partly because science. And that's maybe science with a small s rather than a big S, but we're educated into the fact that numbers, data is very deterministic and can be relied and depended upon. I'll come back to that one in a minute. And it can do, and it's good stuff. But we have a curious relationship with it. Some researchers from Cornell University took to the streets and gave people some basic data about a fictional medicine and how it treated a particular disease. Fine. 67% of the people asked said, I believe that is an effective medicine. Yay, science. Okay. However, what they then did was that they added a really simple graph, not hugely dissimilar to this one, which didn't present any new data at all. All it did was present the two clinical conditions, with and without the drug. And this is what happened. The number of people who believed that drug was effective went from 67% to 97%. No new data, just some lines. All right? We are extremely susceptible to data for influencing our opinions and what happens. And yet, actually, we have very curious ways of working with data. So why? Why do we stick with data? One reason. I can't get inside your head. And you can't get inside mine, and that may be a good thing. But as researchers, of people like me working with humans, we need some way to get inside your head. Your experience is what we call subjective. It's unique to you. It is a compound of your unique memories, experience, your DNA, all the things that happened to you, what you ate, who you've bumped into in your lives. It's very difficult to compare that between people. What we need is something objective, something that's out there that you and I can agree on. That's 10 sheep. 10 sheep. I will give you 25 chickens. Right? If we're going to live together in groups, we need to have some agreed objective measure. Otherwise, we're just going to kind of beat each other up and argue. So numbers are really good for that. They're a very objective measure, black and white, we can agree on. And we have kind of strong cultural norms about numbers. We have really strong what we call intersubjectivity. We can agree that's 5 sheep. It doesn't become a matter of debate. Now, it could do, because I could go, well, those are quite scrawny sheep. I like those two, but not those ones. Could you bring me some fatter sheep? But numbers kind of take all of that ambiguity away. They make us really comfortable, because actually, we don't really like ambiguity very much, do we? And in fact, our brains do everything they can to get rid of ambiguity. So, back to getting inside your head. We've developed all sorts of mechanisms to do that. And this is one of them. This is called a Likert scale that haunts my daily life. You've probably seen one of these, right? Strongly agree to strongly disagree. This does magic. It takes the warm, fluffy stuff from inside of your head and gives me numbers. Hard, raw data. So I can go, well, there seems to be 47% agreement with that statement. Did anyone agree with that statement, 47%? Nobody did, right? You circle the box, there is no 47 for you to circle. But it enables me to process huge amounts of data and take that subjective opinion and turn it into something objective, because computers, right? So we now have tools that enable us to process huge amounts of information. So I can question and collect data on hundreds of thousands of people and kind of crunch that down. Now, thankfully, computers are a little bit smaller and more affordable than this kind of 5 meg IBM beastie here. Okay, I've got a memory stick somewhere in my pocket, which is like, I think this is like 16 gig, costs slightly less. But that explosion in data storage and data processing has actually created a demand for data. Because we've got things that process it, we collect more of it. And even now, from a lot of what I do from an engineering point of view, we collect data that we have no idea what to do with, just in case one day it might be useful, okay? Because storage is cheap. So much data that we don't know what to do with it. We have numbers about numbers and numbers about numbers about numbers. And one of our former prime ministers in the UK, Benjamin Disraeli, said this: there are 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, that's probably a bit of a cruel rap for statistics, and they are very, very useful mechanisms. But they've kind of come into a little bit of trouble recently. A lot of psychological research has had to be re-questioned because of the statistical methods that have been used, because unfortunately, they turned out to be a little bit wrong. So how do we relate to data? Well, how do you normally see data when you kind of pick up the paper? You probably see something like this. Let's go for a nice controversial one here. Debt crisis. Okay, this is data from the UK. It's UK debt as a percentage of GDP. Pretty straightforward, nice data stat. It's over the last decade. Seemed like a good time. Now, I don't know about you, but this is not quite screaming debt crisis to me yet. So let's fix up this graph just a little bit. I'm not going to change any of the data. I'm just going to make it clearer for you, okay? Because I think the line is a little bit thin, so let's make that a little bit thicker so you can see what's going off. Have I helped you there? Feeling a bit more red crisis-y. Now, I'm wasting a huge amount of real estate on the chart because I've based that from zero. Clearly, there's no data points down there, so that's extraneous. Let's just filter those out and rebase it up there. Okay? How are we feeling about debt crisis right now? Okay, same data. I've just framed it in a slightly different way. Okay, and we look at data like this every day, really simple graphs, and I've deliberately chosen the most simple one. And in terms of kind of editorial, deliberately or non-deliberately, it kind of gets messed with. Now, this is a partial framing. Let's go back and take a bigger span. We're going to take my lifetime. Actually, surprisingly long. This is back to the heady days of the 1970s, and now we see a completely different picture for UK debts. Okay, same data set on the left-hand side. I've just expanded it. I haven't changed the representation. But of course, that's only a small part of the picture. I just want to adjust that because I'm a bit kind of offline graphs now. I'm liking bar charts, because they have nice horizontal lines across the top and break things up, because it was looking a bit trendy up to the right. Okay, I didn't change the data. All I did was I changed that from a line to a bar graph. And you're perceiving that differently now, I'm guessing, right? Lots of nods. Now, that's a small part of the picture, because if I go back to the roaring 20s, they have really good news for us. Because if I look back in that frame, we can party like it's 1920, because we're in really good shape right here. Now, of course, that's only a small part of the overall data set, because I can go and dig out the history books and go back to around about the 1600s, and I get a really different picture of UK national debt. Okay, so data is not straightforward. Now, looking at that graph, can you start to see some patterns in it? Yeah, we'll come back to that in a second. Okay, those patterns. Now, this is actual UK debt. This is net debt, so this is the actual number of pounds that the UK owes. And yes, that does say 1,355 billion pounds. Okay, completely different graph. Data taken in a slightly different way, telling a completely different story. Silence the room there, there's panic. Unpanic, everybody, unpanic. Okay, let's switch topic. You might have seen the news this morning. There was a lot of talk about kind of hearing loss from music. Well, we can pull data on that. This is sound pressure, and you already know today that we measure pressure levels in pascals. Sound pressure is kind of very low, so we measure it in micropascals. What I've got here is everything from a kind of quiet recording studio all the way up to a discotheque where the youth spend their days. And what's evident from this graph very clearly is that loud music is going to destroy your hearing, right? That's what the graph says. Now, of course, if I talk to the sound engineers at the back of the room here, they will tell you, Benjamin, we don't measure sound in micropascals. You fool. We use sound pressure level measurement, SPL, and we measure it in dB on a logarithmic scale. And actually, it looks a lot more like this, which gives you the great excuse of saying, please, can you stop that conversation? You're deafening me, because it's about the same difference from there to the loud music. Right? Now, actually, from the point of view of hearing loss, neither of these graphs are relevant. Because the graph that's relevant is how sensitive are our ears to being damaged. And as it turns out, that even wouldn't be the relevant graph. Because one of the challenges with in-ear earphones is that we miss a lot of the cues that tell us what's loud. You go to a loud concert, you feel it in your guts, right? The hair stands up on the back of your head. When you've got headphones, you don't have those cues. So that's actually not going to show up on a graph at all. Okay? So graphs are one way to represent data, but data is much richer, much more complex than that. And we always assume that we've got the right data, even when we haven't. And that comes to how we work. So if we go to the real experts with numbers, people who can make huge amounts of money disappear and reappear, that would be the banks, of course. If you look at their predictions, what you'll see is this, and this is kind of more common in scientific papers, is confidence intervals. So we've got predictions here, and you'll see it's banded in graduated colours according to their confidence and their predictions. So this is hopefully cheering you up about how the economy is going. Excellent stuff. 100-page report, 200-page report, worth reading every quarter. It will keep you wide awake. What I want you to notice about that graph is look over to the right-hand side. There is confidence intervals on the historic data as well. Because even that historic data gets revised and changed. Because even the best digital data has some error in it, has some degree of uncertainty. And I'm pretty sure that you never see that in most of the representations of data that you see day by day. This is a pie chart. I love pie charts. It's a particular favorite one of mine. It's the countries that have won the World Series. And here's a picture of me with the World Series trophy there. It's kind of cool. When the Red Sox won it. That's the only reason I'm showing you this chart, actually. It's the photo. More seriously, I've done something unusual there. I've told you why I chose and selected and presented the data. And actually, I need to do a pie chart for what's going to happen next. Okay, but usually when we get presented with data, we don't get presented with the rationale. Here's the numbers. Draw a conclusion. We don't get the editorial context to it. I'm going to show you an ancient pie chart. Ancient pie chart. Oh. Okay, you can grow. Now, there's something kind of weird going off here, clearly. Our brain is very visual. 60%, maybe even 2/3 of our brain is given over to visual functioning. We're very visual creatures in a very visual society. That does mean that there's 1/3 of your brain left for boring things like breathing and remembering to have your heart beat and listening to me. But the thing about that 2/3 of the brain that's doing visual stuff is most of it is multifunction. Yes, it's visual, but it's doing other things. And if it wasn't, you'd be bumping into walls and tripping over, and that's just socially awkward. It turns out from very recent brain studies that even areas of the brain that previously we thought were completely dedicated to visual functioning, like the L1 area that we thought just did real kind of optic nerve visual stuff, is impacted by motor function. So think of it this way. Literally, what your hands are doing impacts on what you see, because the brain is this messy, wired network that interrupts itself and it interacts with different functions. This is what it does. It's how it works. Our brains and our vision is not like a camera. Okay, my friend Andy Tia here is a wonderful photographer, but Andy doesn't see the world in the same way that a digital camera does. You and I don't see the world in the same way that a digital camera does. Our brain has to do some really clever things to take the 2D representations that we have and turn them into 3D representations. And if you don't believe me, exhibit 1. Okay, why are you seeing a pyramid in my pie chart? Well, you're seeing that because your brain's trying to help. Everyone right now point to the circle. Oh, no, this is the circle. I'm standing on the circle. That's not a circle. Do you know how I know it's not a circle? It has 2 ends, okay? Our vision wants to complete things. It wants to interpret things in terms of our historic context and make them make sense. It has to do all sorts of things like use what we call occlusion, how objects interact with each other and obscure each other, parallax. Really interesting. If you look at a scene and don't move your head, try it sometime. You rely on how things move to actually perceive them. Which object is in front here? You're really suspicious of me now, aren't you? I'll help you out. It's obviously the Pac-Man with his eyes shut. That's the one that's in front. Nothing is in front. This is a 2-dimensional flat chart. And yet our brains want to take it and interpret it in 3D because it's all about not getting eaten and not falling on our face. We weren't designed to process huge amounts of data. Now, can anybody see the square? Yeah, you're still nodding. There is no square. There's 3 dots on my graph. There is no square there at all. Let me get rid of the square for you. It's better, no square. The square's gone. You're not seeing a square at all. There is no square. Okay? This is called shared fate, where we see things moving together. Our brains say, well, these things belong together. They're doing the same thing. Do you remember the pattern in that chart that I showed you? There is no pattern. The blips in that graph are due to fairly random and unfortunate wars that caused huge debt. There is no pattern. Our brains go fishing, but if we want to make sense of data, we need to avoid going fishing, throwing a hook in and pulling just absolutely anything out. This is a chessboard. There is no sphere. It's really hard. Even if you know the distortions, you can't unsee them because our brains want to do what they do, and they want to do it really, really quickly and really, really efficiently. No problem, you say, Benjamin. I will never look at another graph again in my life. I shall use any words. 2 sentences. Time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. Okay, I'll give you a different one. Have a go at this one. This is what's called a garden path sentence, and you're looking very pained right now. The reason you're looking pained is it is ambiguous until it gets to the point at which it resolves. Actually, if you go back to us being toddlers and infants, our visual and auditory processing systems are pretty similar, and they kind of specialize up. We have all sorts of biases in the way that we hear sound, that we read words as well. It doesn't go away. We can't separate thinking from experiencing. As a famous psychologist Bartlett put it, he said, it's fitting to speak of every human cognitive reaction, perceiving, imagining, remembering, thinking, and reasoning as an effort after meaning. You and I are amazing sense-making machines. We make sense of everything, even if it doesn't make sense. We're driven by our expectations. This is a white swan. It's nothing unusual. If you walked outside and you saw a black swan, you'd be pretty stunned, right? If we were in Australia, you'd be pretty stunned if you walked out and saw a white swan. You know, how we perceive data and what is usual and unusual is driven by historic expectations. Spot the odd line out. You got straight to it, didn't you? Obviously, it's the longer line on the left-hand side of the slide. Can you spot the line that's moving? If you can't, just kind of bob your head around like that with a bit of this help. Oh, that looks so cool from here. Can anyone see the moving line? There's no moving line on the chart. That was just kind of fun. But our visual system plays tricks with us, our auditory system plays tricks with us, and that impacts on how we see data. More than that, kind of finishing off, data actually changes how we think. Now, there's obvious things. We read a film review and we decide that we're not going to go and see the film. We're not going to go and see 50 Shades of Grey. But how about if we could actually see 79 Shades of Grey? And that's pretty much what happened. So Daphne Bavillier gets people to play video games, which is kind of cool. But the interesting thing about that is testing their visual acuity before and afterwards, we get like a 58% shift in their ability to detect shades of grey. Literally, the brain adapts and specializes to the task at hand and gets better at it. Think about it. There are people who look at spreadsheets every day whose brains have specialized in that. They can see things in those spreadsheets that you can't, and that explains much of the financial world. Yeah, the field of data science is new and emerging, particularly around human data, because a lot of the science around statistics comes from crops, from agriculture. But the thing is that crops don't leap up, start surfing the internet and reading about themselves and changing their own behavior, right? And yet, day by day, we read data about ourselves and we change our behavior because of the data about ourselves, which suddenly makes all that lovely data that I've collected untrue. It's most unfair of you. Okay. The reality is this: there is no such thing as a neutral presentation of data. All data will tell stories, whether intended or unintended, whether they are there or whether they are not. We see stories in that data based on our history, our expectations. So what do we do about that? Well, what we do is this, is embrace the story. Embrace our humanity. You know? We exist at the levels of story and shared meaning. So when you see data, say, what story is this telling me? Why is it telling me this story? What's intended? How am I interpreting this? What of myself am I bringing to this data? And if you play with data, tell stories with data. Data is fantastically convincing. Numbers convince you. But the thing that you will take away from today, the thing that you will remember, will be the stories. That and the fact that tomato ketchup is not a fruit smoothie. Thank you.